Hey guys, how's it going? It's Al. The playoffs are here. Daily Fantasy NFL still exists. I know that your season-long NFL Fantasy Football League team is done for the season. You either won your league or you didn't. I guess maybe 1 in 12 of you won your league, and the rest of you didn't. But Daily Fantasy is still here, and you still have a chance to win $1 million this weekend on DraftKings during the wild card round of the playoffs. So I'm going to go through with my chat here. They're going to ask me some questions. We're going to go through all the games. Usually this video is about 45 minutes to an hour long, but based on this slate, there's only 4 games. There's only so much stuff that we can look at. It's going to be a little shorter than normal, but I'm going to try and dig as deeply as I can. All my other content for the week is out. The first look came out on Monday. You guys have all watched that probably by now. Daily Fantasy Edge podcast is out wherever you listen to podcasts. Also available on YouTube on DraftKings channel if you want to go check out the video for that. Instead of listening to the audio. The 06010 Fantasy Football Focus podcast is out with myself and Daniel Dopp and Mike Clay. That came out yesterday. And Best Buys is also available if you're an ESPN Plus subscriber. And like, honestly, everybody's got Disney Plus. So if you have Disney Plus, you have ESPN Plus. So like, you're probably a subscriber right now because I know y'all watch The Mandalorian. So you can go check that article out as well, where I go a little bit more in depth, 2,000-word article every single week about my favorite plays. And then we do this show every single Friday live on Twitch. There's a link down below in the description if you wanted to come check out the stream and say hi so I can get to know you. If you guys have been watching these videos all year long, I still stream as much as I possibly can. Obviously over Christmas and New Year's week I streamed less than I normally do, but 5-6 days a week moving forward is going to be the schedule until after football season. I'll go down to like 4 or 5 days a week with a lot of different type of content coming in. I've got podcasts. I'm going to do stuff for off-season football, combine stuff, season-long fantasy league stuff, a whole lot of stuff, and I'm very excited about what we're going to put out. So let's get to the chat. Let's bring them in. Let's start talking about this slate, and let's kind of break it down. We were talking a little bit before we started the stream about the 4 games and possibilities of things that we want to do. I am less concerned about poking holes in players this week, right? All the players on this slate, even the best ones, even Michael Thomas, he's the best player on the slate in my opinion. We can play the red team and look at it and say, well, you know, Michael Thomas probably isn't going to do that because, you know, this other guy on the team and this other. We can do that for every single player. Let's not focus on trying to poke holes in plays. Let's focus more on trying to find scenarios that we can maybe leverage the field on. Maybe we can be a little bit different from where everybody's going. Because very honestly, there's going to be a large collection of players, ownership-wise, on very specific plays on this slate. Guys like Michael Thomas are going to come in at an absurd high ownership rate. Kamara, Singletary, the quarterbacks never get super duper high, so I'm not really worried about the quarterbacks. But Michael Thomas in large field tournaments could be 70+% owned. Devin Singletary 40+. DK Metcalf probably around 25%. John Brown probably 20 to 40% owned. Goddard, if Ertz is out, Goddard's going to have like 50 to 75% ownership on this slate. So we're going to worry about where can we find differentiation for our lineups? How can we build things that are going to separate? Because the 2 highest scoring games on the slate are going to be the Minnesota-New Orleans game, at least from Vegas's perspective, and Seattle-Philadelphia. Both of those games project to be higher scoring. They have better offensive players in situations where they are matched up against something that the opposing defense has trouble stopping. So there's more paths to success for them in those games as opposed to Buffalo's really tough defense. Houston playing at home against Buffalo, who hasn't put up a lot of points in any game this year, right? Josh Allen's really had like, what, 1 game where he got over 30 points this season as opposed to like 5 last year. New England playing in New England. Tennessee wants to play very slow and run the football, and New England very good at stopping opposing offenses, especially at home, outdoors, in the weather, all that sort of stuff. So instead of trying to poke holes in players, let's look for opportunities with lower ownership stuff. Can you be successful with playing Kamara and Michael Thomas but fading Breeze? Yes. Quarterback scoring is always very clustered, right? It's just where it is. I mean, if we take a look at all the quarterbacks on this slate: Wilson, Breeze, Josh Allen, Watson, Tannehill, Wentz, Cousins, and Brady. We have a band on average points per game between 17.7 and 23 points. That's not a wide gap. The top 8 has a difference of 5 points on their average points per game. Okay? It's not a situation where there's much separation, and that's reflected in the prices where you've got 5,800 to like 6,800. That's why quarterback pricing is always so clustered, because quarterback scoring is always so clustered. Yes, you can get quarterbacks that score you 30 to 35 points in a week, but it's rare that one of them scores 4. A lot of quarterbacks tend to score between 17 and 25 DraftKings points every single week. There will be multiples on this slate as well. Look at wide receiver, sort by fantasy points per game. 25, the top 8 down to 13. You have a 12-point difference. Running back, same sort of situation. 22 points down to 10. Much wider band of scoring for the running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, as opposed to those quarterbacks. So when it comes to quarterbacks, that's why, one, we try to pay down at quarterback. It's not really possible for you to do this week, just based on there's only 8 quarterbacks in play. And their band of scoring isn't all that wide. With Thomas having such high ownership, do you eat the chalk and go 8v8 instead? I think that that's going to be where it goes most often. So Michael Thomas is going to be your largest tournament decision this week, mostly because I think, okay, if you're playing head-to-heads, 50-50s, double-ups, triple-ups, Michael Thomas is in your lineup. He should come preloaded. You're just playing him. There's no reason to not play him in a cash game. And I know that even at this point in the season, somebody's going to come around in YouTube comments. What does a cash game mean? A cash game is something that pays out 33% or more of the field. So triple ups, double ups, 50-50s, head-to-head games. Those are your cash games. I come from a poker background. And when I started playing daily fantasy and producing content, I said, these are cash games and these are tournaments. And you play differently in a poker cash game than you would in a tournament. And you play differently in a daily fantasy cash game than you would in a tournament. So in a cash game, I want floor and I want an accessible ceiling. So I want floor for the price. The floor changes, like I'm more giving to guys that are 3 to 4K, and I'm more strict on a floor. I want a higher floor from guys that have Michael Thomas's price tag of 9,300. Ignore week 17. Okay, he had already got the record. They didn't have to force him the ball. He wasn't a big part of their game plan. Any game that matters, he's a big part of the game plan. Atlanta held him to 8 targets, 10.8 DraftKings points. The mere fact that that is a massive outlier, right? He is averaging 25 DraftKings points per game. That is nearly 3x his salary. It's almost like clicking Christian McCaffrey, where you can say, okay, when Michael Thomas is on the field, I can expect him to put up 25 to 35 DraftKings points, and that's enough to click into your lineups. And if somebody does not play him in a cash game, they have to figure out on a short slate where they're going to get those 25 to 35 points from. And there's not any spot on this slate where the meat of the bell curve is in that 25 to 35 point range. Michael Thomas has the largest bit of his bell curve in that range. So fading him in cash games, in my opinion, this week is entirely stupid. Like, there's no other way for me to put that. If you're playing cash games, he's in your lineup. If you're playing tournaments, he's also likely in your lineup, but there are ways that we can work on saying, okay, I'm going to build a lineup without Michael Thomas in the case that he only scores 18 to 22 DraftKings points, where you might not need him to win a tournament. Cook or Henry in cash? I honestly think that Cook is the better cash game play because of because of a few things. One, his pass game usage gives him a much higher floor than Derrick Henry. They're both predicted to be underdogs in this game, though I I kind of feel like Tennessee can win this game. I'm not burying the Patriots. I'm not disrespecting the Patriots. Anybody from the Boston area or the state of Massachusetts, get out of my mentions. If you, Al thinks that the Patriots suck and he thinks they're going to lose. The Patriots always think everybody thinks they're going to lose. Tennessee is kind of a different animal. I think that they can win this game on the field. I don't think they win it 100% of the time. In the case that they do win it, Derrick Henry's going to get the ball 25 to 30 times. None of those are going to come through the air. So in the case, if you think that they're going to win, Derrick Henry becomes a fine play, but for 400 less than Derrick Henry, with as good a numbers as Derrick Henry has gotten, right, in wins, this was a loss. Still had 21 touches, only one target, 8.6 DraftKings points. There are routes to Derrick Henry only getting you like 9.5 points on this slate. There are. If New England gets up 2 touchdowns and Derrick Henry gets 21 carries and runs for 95 yards and catches no balls, does not score a touchdown, that's 9 points. That's realistic. That is a realistic part of his probable or most probable outcomes this week. And by most probable outcomes, I mean that middle 80%. Not looking at the lower 10%, not looking at the top 10% of outcomes, but that middle 80%, under 12 points is in his, in his realistic range this week. I think he falls more in the 15 to 18 points sort of range. And for 8.2, that's tougher. You look at Dalvin Cook, who their offensive coordinator says we're going to unleash Dalvin Cook this week. I don't know how much more unleashed Dalvin Cook can get this season based on what he was before. But if he's going to get this sort of usage that he was getting in the first half of the season, if you define that as being unleashed, then great. 20 touches on the ground, 5, 6, 8 targets through the air. That gives him a much higher floor, and he was one of the most utilized players in the league in terms of red zone touches for a running back and inside the 5 touches or inside the 5 carries for a running back, which gives us that touchdown ceiling that we're looking for. I'm going to lean way heavier this week on a 4-game slate on touchdown equity to try and win tournaments than I would have to on a 12, 13, 15 game slate where you can get there on volume and then you try to get some touchdowns as well. Touchdowns are going to define who wins tournaments this week because there are much less games to be played. A slate like this is way more like a showdown slate than a main slate. Even though this is a main slate, it's going to play tournament-wise more like a showdown slate. Wasn't enough volume for Cook this year. I mean, he got hurt near the end of the year, so like that kind of cut his volume down. With Fuller being a game time decision, if he plays or is active, so quote active, do you think he will just be a decoy? Fuller presents problems for opposing defenses and opposing defensive coordinators. He means a lot more to Deshaun Watson. I did this earlier on the stream. I posted the video to Twitter, where I was talking about what Will Fuller means to this Texans offense, and he means a ton. He makes safeties back off the line. He makes double teaming somebody like Hopkins much tougher. And Tre'Davious White has come out and says he doesn't expect to 100% shadow Hopkins this weekend. If Fuller plays, Houston's a much better offense. If Fuller plays, you're talking about a full touchdown per game more expected from Deshaun Watson. You're talking about 60 more passing yards per game for Deshaun Watson. You're talking about a full yard or a yard and a half more on yards per attempt for Watson when Fuller is in versus when he's out. So I'm hoping that Fuller plays because I want this to be a better offensive environment, because Buffalo and Houston, that game, and New England and Tennessee, that game, have by far lower expected offensive totals, at least from where I sit from a fantasy perspective, even though the team totals and the game totals look similar, right? So kind of looking at the DK Sportsbook, Bills and Texans expect to be a close game, over under 44. But the Bills don't really allow you to pass on them that much. They don't allow much to tight ends. They're a very difficult defense to play against. Houston is favored because they're at home. If this was on a neutral field, the Bills would be it's a pick 'em. The Bills might be a point, minus 0.5, minus a half point. Same thing with this game. Patriots by 5. That's gone up from 4.5 at open, and expected 44.5, where this game only expected to score 45 points. But because of the pieces that are involved on offense in this game, we know where the ball is going to go because of the injuries that exist. On Philadelphia in their passing game, you know, if Ertz is even in, which right now is up in the air and we don't know. So if Ertz is in, you know that the funnels of targets is going to go to Ertz, to Goddard, to Greg Ward, and then the running backs. Those are there's 5 players total, and it's hierarchical. We know exactly where those targets are going to go and in what order. If Ertz is out, that takes one more target piece off the field. Then it's like Goddard's going to get 10, maybe 12. Ward's going to get 7 to 10. Boston Scott's going to get 5 to 8. And Sanders is going to get 5 to 8. That's where all the targets are going to go. And you've got a situation where Wentz has thrown the ball 40 times for 7 straight games, a streak that has not occurred since like Matthew Stafford 10 years ago. Or 8 years ago. Like, they're throwing it a ton, so the target rates are up, so we know where fantasy-wise where the ball is going to go. Minnesota, we know that Cook's going to get the ball. If Thielen is 100% healthy, he's going to get the ball. Diggs is going to get the ball. That's where the targets are going to go in that game. And this is a really high-scoring game. They should be throwing because they should be playing from behind. For the Saints, you know the ball is going to go to Michael Thomas first. You know the ball is going to go to Kamara second. You know the ball is going to go to Cook third. And then you can sprinkle in the other guys. Guys like Traquan Smith. Guys like Ted Ginn. And you're not playing Hill as a quarterback because he's going to take away a quarterback slot from you. He's a gadget player. So we're hoping that he doesn't get a lot of touchdowns this week or a lot of touches, high leverage touches. Now in these games here, different story, right? So yeah, the total is very similar to this game. But my thinking is, which running backs are going to get the love for the Patriots? Is it going to be White or is it going to be Sony Michel? Sony Michel's got 58 carries the last 3 games. Is the ball going to go to him this week? Is he going to break 100 yards rushing against Tennessee? Does he score 2 touchdowns? Because touchdown equity is something I said we need to lean on a lot more. Is A.J. Brown going to be able to get loose against the Patriots pass defense? We don't know that yet. Corey Davis has had 2 great games against this New England pass defense. He's only 3,800. I expect him to carry some ownership, as a lot of people are going to lean on that batter versus pitcher type matchup and historical. Well, he's done a lot against them and he's cheap and I need a cheap guy. Is Derrick Henry going to get his carries? And if he is going to get those carries, they're going to be efficient carries. If they get behind by 2 touchdowns, is the ball going to go to Lewis? There's a lot more question marks about where the ball is going to go or how efficient Tannehill can be against this Patriots defense that is extremely tough. Bills, Texans, same thing. How efficient will Hopkins be against Tre'Davious White? The things that these two games that these teams do does not match up well against the defense that lines up against them. As opposed to these 2 games where everything that these teams do, the Vikings do a really great job of stuffing the run. The Saints could give a damn about the run. They're going to throw the ball, right? They're going to throw the ball. Well, people are going to say, well, Kamara, I'm not going to play Kamara because he's got that big red number by him because the Minnesota Vikings are a tough matchup against running backs. Kamara only touches the ball 12 times on the ground. Kamara does his damage in the air, right? He gets his 6 to 10 targets. So he's not, the positional matchup isn't the same. The Vikings have trouble stuffing things on the outside. They have trouble shutting down opposing wide receivers. Most voluminous wide receiver in the game plays for the Saints and has like an 80 to 85% catch rate. So if he gets his 10 to 12 targets, you know they're going to be quality. And he's going to get those red zone looks. They also have a tight end who you can't stop because you have to worry about Kamara out of the backfield with a linebacker, and you have to worry about 2 guys worrying about Thomas. So Cook, who has the trust of Drew Brees, could find himself in the end zone as well. We kind of know where the touchdowns should go in these games. But I do believe that the slate is going to be determined. Who wins tournaments is going to be determined by what happens in these games on Saturday. Right? So if this Bills-Texans game has 55 to 65 total points scored and they blow out a little bit, and the touchdowns go to the higher owned players like John Brown if he has 2 touchdowns, or Cole Beasley has a 100 yards and a touchdown, if Allen has himself 2 rushing touchdowns, or if Singletary and Josh Allen diametrically opposed. If one of them has 2 rushing touchdowns, the other one is screwed. And both are going to be somewhat highly owned. Singletary, I project to be one of the higher owned running backs on the slate. If the Patriots score 2 early touchdowns with Sony Michel, not unlike they did in last year's playoffs, right? If you remember the first 2 games of last year's playoffs, when it was basically the Sony Michel show on the first couple of drives and they get out to a large lead, James White's not going to go off. Edelman's not going to go off. Sanu's not going to go off. And Brady's not going to go off. There's a possibility that the Titans pass game the guys do with increased volume under that game scenario. So like what I try to do on a slate like this is I project a little bit more. And I don't mean project like I do projections. I do projections for every slate. What I mean by I project a little bit more is I'm willing to project game scenarios to see how they're going to play out. Right? I want to see how they're going to play out. So I'm more willing to project game scenarios and specific game scenarios so that I can build lineups around those and then fill in with my core players as opposed to just blindly stack, double stack, bring back. I will still be doing that, but I will also be building some lineups where anecdotally I can say these are things that I think are going to happen based on the spread, based on the totals, based on matchups, or based on possible outcomes for these games. No one's talking about Julian Edelman. Yes, people are definitely talking about Julian Edelman. The crazy thing with Julian Edelman is we don't know how injured he is or how much this injury is affecting his playing time. Edelman versus Metcalf. I prefer Metcalf. Would I fade Fuller? That's a decision that everybody has to make for themselves. Fading is tough on a 4-game slate. If you're making a ton of lineups, if you're making 3 lineups, sure, you can fade him, but like he's really not expensive. And there's certain players at wide receiver who can break this slate, right? There are definitely certain players that can break this slate. Michael Thomas is not going to break the slate because he's going to be too high owned to break it. If he has 10 points, that would kind of break the slate. If Michael Thomas has 10 points, it's going to be hard to win a tournament with Michael Thomas. A lot of other things would have to happen, but I don't think there's very many paths to that. DeAndre Hopkins is a guy who we've seen be able to break a slate in the past. He would need to have a 30-point fantasy game to do that. It's going to be tough to do that against this Bills defense. Doesn't mean he can't get there. He would need 100 yards and 2 touchdowns and like 9 catches. Tough for him to get there with that. Same thing for A.J. Brown. We've seen slate-breaking performances from him this season. Going to be tougher for him to do that against this New England defense, but the ownership should reflect that as well. Tyler Lockett is somebody who I do think is in a position to have a slate-breaking possible performance because of the matchup. Expected back and forth game from these 2 teams leads this team in terms of red zone targets. Not end zone targets, but red zone targets, and has a efficient quarterback throwing the ball. If he gets loose for a long touchdown, which he hasn't really done much the last few weeks or this season versus last, but if he gets loose against this Philly defense, who has allowed a lot of long receptions and long touchdowns this year, he is someone who could very easily break this slate by having a 35-point game at a little bit lower ownership than most. We've seen Steph Diggs do the same. Again, this is a situation where they're going to be chasing a lot. It's him and Thielen, depending on what type of percentage of the targets Thielen gets. If it's closer to the beginning of the season, where at 6.2, Thielen's getting 28 to 30% of the target market share for Minnesota in a game where I project them to throw the ball a lot more than normally, he could definitely be a guy who breaks the slate at a mid-price or a middle price. I think Metcalf's going to be higher owned at a very similar price at 6,100. Led the league in terms of end zone targets. If he scores 2 touchdowns and has the volume that he had last week with 12 targets, which I don't expect, I expect more like 6 to 9 targets, and he scores 2 touchdowns and has 100 yards. Also somebody who has been utilized very much down the field, high ADOT throws, and like I said, led the league in those high leverage end zone targets. If he ends this game with 2 touchdowns, he could break the slate and also has a very good matchup. And John Brown, somebody else who has the ability to get behind defenses, scored a long touchdown in week 16 against New England, but hasn't scored a ton of long touchdowns this year. Would have to break off a 60-yarder in order to put himself in that sort of position to do the same. So And yeah, there's cheaper guys as well, but I don't expect slate breaking performances out of the sub 3K guys. Like if Corey Davis has one of those days like he's had twice against New England already, where where he puts up like 30 something fantasy points, which we don't see from him often. Adam was so mean to him on the podcast yesterday, saying that he was theoretically talented. I thought that was hilarious. Why is it shifting around so much? Corey Davis is going to carry some ownership at 3,800 because we need to find value guys. There just aren't that many. We're going to need to find them at the wide receiver position because the running back has some very specific values that I think people are going to center on. Those high price plays between Kamara and Cook and Henry, as well as guys like Singletary and Sanders and Boston Scott, are going to be the highest owned guys on the running back side. So I would say focus your tournament lineups, especially if only building 3 and 5 of them, around the players that you think could possibly end up with a 25 to 35 point game, because touchdowns are going to be a thing that determines this slate, not unlike a showdown slate, way different from a main slate where there's 12 to 15 games. Hyde versus Homer. I prefer Homer only because of his usage in the passing game. Guys, thank you very much for the subs as well. C Perky 37, all the chocolate milk, 6 months, and Freebird. Thank you very much for the subs, guys. Is Taysom Hill a viable option to open up salary for 3 big players? I don't think so. I think you're giving up way too much. And here's why. 4,500 for Taysom Hill, as opposed to every other quarterback who is 5,800 to 6,800. There's going to be a quarterback who's going to score 25 or more points on this slate. There just is. That's 100% going to be a thing that happens. 8.7, 3.6, 2, 1.6, 2.12, 1, 9.5, 15.3 against Arizona. Great. 18.5 against Atlanta. Sure. The rest is crap. Taysom Hill is a vulture and nothing more. If Taysom Hill was a tight end or Taysom Hill was listed as a running back, then I would be more likely to play him as a tournament dart throw. I will not be throwing any darts. If I build 150 lineups this weekend, there will not be one Taysom Hill dart at quarterback. Not one. He's a wild card. He can score 2 touchdowns. Okay. And how is that going to leverage the position? His highest game is barely above the average of the worst quarterbacks on this slate. So every other quarterback on the slate has a floor at or higher than his ceiling. You're giving up way too much to not get much in return if you're playing Taysom Hill. If Taysom Hill has a 25-point fantasy day this weekend, then I was wrong. But even if he has like an 18-point fantasy day, I would say there's maybe a 0.1% chance at best, and probably lower, probably 0.05 or 0.02% chance that Taysom Hill is on the winning lineup in a large field tournament. There's like as close to 0% as possible that Taysom Hill is going to be on a tournament lineup that wins a tournament. It's not a route that I would suggest going with the other quarterbacks on this slate. His floor is entirely too low, and his ceiling is also entirely too low. His ceiling is the other quarterbacks' floors. If DK had a super flex and I could use him at flex, it would be a different story. Like I said, if he was a tight end and was like 2,900 or 3,100, I'd consider it. But at quarterback, the opportunity cost is way too high. You're not going to win a tournament having Taysom Hill in there at your quarterback slot. If it was showdown, yes. Showdown, I'd put him get in there. Mike, you're going to lose if you play Taysom Hill at quarterback. I can't make it any more simple, dude. You play Taysom Hill this week at quarterback in tournaments, you are not going to give yourself any chance at winning a tournament. Please don't. I'm trying to help. There's plenty of other guys. Like, look, Brady has not had a good season, right? From a fantasy perspective, this is Tom Brady's worst season in a lot of years. 28, 24, 23, 27, 26, 18. That's Taysom Hill's ceiling right here, 18. 28, 17. You can find the money at other positions if you want to save, right? Like tight end is a position that you can punt if you want to punt tight end to try and get yourself to a place where maybe you can get somewhere. You're hoping that these guys fall in the end. These are not great volume plays at all. Not Pruitt. These are not great volume plays at all. Why do I keep clicking Pruitt? Like Irv Smith. People are going to sprinkle Irv Smith to try to save money. Very similar point distribution to Taysom Hill. Right? Very similar point distribution over the course of his 17-week season to Taysom Hill. And you still get to roster a quarterback. Jordan Akins. Same thing. Very similar point distribution. Right? 1 or 2 ceiling type games for him at his salary. Costs you $2,000 less than Taysom Hill and does not occupy your quarterback slot. Perkins. If Ertz is out, Perkins becomes somewhat of a thing. Big body, catches very well, good at boxing out. 2,900 against Seattle, who struggles against tight ends. Like I said, if Ertz is out, he gets onto my radar. If Ertz is in, I ignore Perkins. Croft, no. Dawson, Knox, same sort of thing. Similar floor and ceiling expectation and hit rate to Taysom Hill at 1,500 to 1,700 less, while not occupying your quarterback slot. If you want to punt tight end. Don't punt quarterback. Yeah, I saw that thing about Winter Storm Henry plowing down on the New England area. If you want to play the Winter Storm narrative and go with Derrick Henry, I get it. I think Henry's fine. I think he's going to catch some ownership. I don't think we're going to see low ownership on Henry, but like define low ownership on a slate like this. And it's his birthday. Oh yeah, all the narrative street stuff. Lovely. Who do I think will be the top 3 running backs on the slate, like based on ownership? Kamara, Cook, Singletary, James White, Derrick Henry, Sony Michel. I think those guys in whatever thing. And I don't know, like whatever projection system you have, they'll tell you who they think on raw projection is, the highest scoring. The hard choice is Cook or Henry or Kamara. Yeah. If you're playing Henry, I assume that you think that the Patriots are going to lose. Right? Brady being the cheapest. This is weird for people who have just followed football for a long time, or people who have played daily fantasy for a long time. Seeing a playoff slate where there are 8 quarterbacks in play. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And Tom Brady is the QB 8 at home while favored is odd. It's just odd. It's really weird to see this. So from a perspective of if you want to pay down in tournaments, it's very easy to build tournament lineups around this New England team if you do this, and then either this or this. It's very easy to build teams if you think New England's going to score 30 points and they're going to come through the air, to do that. If you don't think they're going to come through the air, then it's real easy to just do that. And again, like I said, I'm going to project more in my lineup building. Project outcomes of games. And in scenarios. In this scenario, for me to win a tournament, I need these things to happen. And this New England Tennessee game, if you want to win tournaments, is going to be one that you're going to have to be right about with your projection for what will happen in that game, both from a game flow point of view and from a fantasy point of view. New England's a different team in the playoffs, usually better than the regular season the past decade. Maybe. What if the Titans fall behind 10-0? Does it affect Henry's usage? It might affect his snaps a little bit. 10 doesn't affect it. I think 17 does. Like a 10-point spread is not, they're not going to stop giving Henry the ball because that's what they do. But if they get down 17 and they have to throw it more, there's going to be packages where Henry's not the guy on the field more often than he will be the guy on the field. And I'm the guy who thinks that they need to throw him the ball 3 times a game on a screen. We've gone through that. I think they need to throw him the ball more, even if they're not going to utilize him like a pass catching back. Getting him in space with blockers in front of him running at defensive backs at full speed downhill seems like a really good idea. But they don't do that. But when they do it, it usually turns into like an 80-yard touchdown. Like if we had a video of every catch that Henry had this year, how many catches did he have? This wouldn't be hard. He had 18 catches. Can somebody get me a video of every one of the 18 catches that Derrick Henry had this year? Because he had 2 touchdowns on those 18 catches. Spence, I said the exact same thing. I think Evan Silva said the same thing. It's like defensive backs would be forced to make a business decision with Derrick Henry with a wedge in front of him coming at you at full speed, and you got to make an open field tackle with him coming at you at full speed. Nope. How many catches did he have? Answer, not enough. He should have legitimately 32 to 48 catches a year, all on screenplays. That's all he needs to do. Simple pitch and catch screen. Play action, throw him a screen, let him run in space. Very easy to do. But they just don't do it. Philly run D is decent. Yeah, Philly is a team that you want to throw against, but they're playing New England. I mean, I'm worried about all the games. Studfi. Like I'm trying to do the same thing with Buffalo and Houston, right? I'm looking at this Buffalo Houston game. The first thing that pops out to me is that Josh Allen and Devin Singletary are completely mutually exclusive. I don't want any lineups that have Josh Allen and Devin Singletary. So like if I'm building lineups on Daily Roto, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to build a group on Daily Roto that makes sure that if I have Josh Allen in a lineup, it is not going to have Devin Singletary in that lineup, because Devin Singletary would have to have 20 touches, 100 yards, and a touchdown. It's most likely not going to come through the air. And Josh Allen would have to have a rushing touchdown and at least 2 through the air. So the odds that both of them, the percent chance that both of these guys in a game where they're expected to score 3 touchdowns total are going to have each a rushing touchdown. Can it happen? Yes, it can happen. Right? A lot of things can happen. But what percent chance do you give that of happening? Like 7? 8% chance? Maybe? Now, if he catches a pass from Josh Allen, great. Right? If he catches a touchdown pass from Josh Allen, awesome. But he doesn't get all that many targets over the last 8 weeks. He just doesn't. He scored 2 pass touchdowns this year. And he has scored 2 rush touchdowns this year. And Josh Allen scored 9. A lot of things would have to break for Josh Allen and Singletary to both have a game-breaking, tournament-breaking week. For Josh Allen to have 25 to 35 DraftKings points, which he's done what? Once this year? Twice. One with 25.44. 2 rushing touchdowns, 1 rushing touchdown. No other game above 25 points. For him to get above 25, he has to do it with his legs. So if he's there, then Singletary isn't. So I'm going to disallow those two guys. Now, I might have Singletary in a lineup where I've also got Deshaun Watson. That's a lineup you can build. Run Josh Allen naked in GPP. I'm probably not going to do that this week because it's a 4-game slate. On a full slate, yes. But if you're running Josh Allen GPP, it's because you believe that he can have a 25+ point game. For him to have a 25 to 35 point game for you, in order for you to be able to win GPPs this weekend, Josh Allen is probably going to be tied to his wide receiver, and it's going to be between him, and you're going to make a choice. And I'm going to force Josh Allen to be at least one, or not at least one. I'm going to have Josh Allen with exactly one of Brown and Beasley in all my Josh Brown lineups. Because if he has that 30+ point game, one of these dudes had at least one touchdown and maybe two. So you want to capture all the upside to try and win tournaments on a short slate. And the only other way that he can have a 35-point game is if he runs for 3 touchdowns, runs for 100 yards, and passes for 120 and no touchdowns, which is the only way he could have a huge game with these guys doing nothing. And again, it can happen, but the likelihood of it happening is extremely small. SMOL. Small. You're throwing defenses out the window this week. Seems like 2400D is the best option. I mean, a defense could definitely break the slate. We talked about slate breaking possibilities before. Like the Patriots defense, as good as they've been at turning teams over, they're 3400. The Bills defense against Houston with as much pressure as the Bills defense, Bills defense gets and Houston allows. Good combination there. New Orleans going up against Minnesota, playing at home, massively favored. You're going to have more opportunities for dropbacks theoretically against Minnesota. So that's what we want to target, is guys that are going to throw the ball a whole lot. Philly's offensive line against Seattle, maybe. Philly's defense against Seattle's offensive line, yes, Seattle has definitely allowed a lot of pressure this year and are playing without their 2 best backs. And Homer is more of a pass catcher, and Lynch, they just dragged him off of the couch to try and come back and play. He doesn't look like he's completely up to speed yet, though he is a great back on his career. Today, he is not the back that he was a year ago or 2 years ago or 3 years ago. Texans D against Buffalo, yes. Josh Allen does have a tendency to turn the ball over. Yes, they get JJ Watt back, which should help their pressure on the opposing quarterback. Titans against New England, we've seen Tom Brady make a lot of mistakes this year, and they're only 2400. Vikings D against Minnesota, I'm probably not going to go that route, but they're only 2200. So I'm hoping that no defense has a 30-point day. I'd rather it come down to the other positions. But if it does, you got to be on that defense. There's no way to predict defensive scoring. I try to predict pressure and dropbacks and things like that. So guys, thank you very much. I appreciate you guys tuning in. Twitch chat, thank you guys very much for asking some very good questions. I hope that I've helped y'all out. I hope that those were some good answers to help you try and think about how to sort out this slate. I try not to give you the answers. I'm not here to teach you or to give you lineups or to say these are the best players, you must jam these guys in. I try to teach you how to think and teach you how to fish. I know that there are some people that don't really appreciate that. They just want to click through the YouTube video and find a lineup to try and copy and paste. But I'm glad that you guys that are here week after week are trying to get better at the game and to try and think like a winning DFS player. Put yourselves in position to be able to take down a tournament. So until that next video, I wish you guys the best of luck on Wildcard Weekend. I'll see you for a first look next Monday for the divisional round. So until then, catch you guys later. Bye.
He's a legend.